move on to the free paper session 8. And we have judges as Dr. Tushar Muni sir, who is the president Navi Mumbai Ophthalmic Society, one of the very senior ophthalmologists from there. Dr. Omkar Telang sir. Sir is the superintendent and associate professor, KJ Somaiya Medical College. And instead of Dr. Dilip Phalke sir, Dr. Rajiv sir from Ahmednagar will be joining us as a judge. So we have three judges here. Welcome everyone. Dr. Tushar Muni sir, can I request you to have a few words before we start the session?
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, all.
Good afternoon.
It is going to be a very interesting session where we have discussions on diabetic retinopathy, proliferative diabetic retinopathy, some innovative thinking, evaluation of macular thicknesses in high myopic patients. All are very interesting topics. I hope all the speakers have joined. And I'll hand it over to moderator, Dr. Sumit. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Do we have a first presenter available? I think there was some problem with Dr. Gaurav's presentation. We will be moving on to the next presentation. Dr. Swapnil Sawant. He's in the meeting. Dr. Swapnil Sawant.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Yeah, you can
screen...
start your presentation, sir.
Yeah. Screen is visible?
Yes, sir. You can make it full screen. Yeah. Now it is correct.
So very good evening to all the judges and hello to all the audience. My topic for today is the PDR management, the use of latest technology as well as the use of the old principles in how it has improved the management of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The challenges in the surgical part of the PDR management are the complex vitreoretinal interface, ischemic process, control of hemostasis, and we have to actually meet the realistic expectations, both anatomically and visually for the patient as well as for the doctor. Obviously, this goes without saying that the pre-operative assessment, a detailed assessment is very, very important. I would lay important stress on the slit lamp biomicroscopy, examination of the iris and B-scan wherever it is indicated. And the need for pre-operative anti-VEGF injections has really helped in management. So it's a video-based presentation. With the advent of 23 gauge and 25 gauge and 27 gauge valve cannulas, the IOP control during the surgery has really improved. The principle still remains that we have to finish the vitrectomy around the ports, start with the core vitrectomy and then proceed to the posterior vitrectomy. The modern vitreous cutters are optimized so that the mouth of the cutter is closer to the base of the cutter, and that has allowed the cutter to be used as a suction device as well as a lifting device. Also, in some cases, it is used as scissors. So the life of a VR surgeon has improved because of these modern cutters. However, the principle remains the same, that we have to look for an opening in the subhyaloid heme, posterior hyaloid face, so that we can enter that space, and that is the correct plane for dissection. I'll just forward this video. So all these adhesions, the fibrovascular proliferative adhesions, also can be managed very well with the modern cutters. Using the backflush function of the cutter, it is easy to get rid of these channel hemorrhages and the clots. And the curved endolaser probe has really helped us to really laser the corners of the vitreoretina. So the anterior hyaloid proliferation, which can occur post-operatively, has really reduced. Going on to the next case, the viewing system is equally important. We have now Biome was the old viewing system, and now we have the Zeiss Resite system and the Merlin system. So if we see better, we can do better. Obviously, again, with the modern technique, the old principle of inducing the PVD remains the gold standard. So both the things have to go hand in hand. We can't just depend upon only the modern instrumentation, but also apply the same old principles, which will lead to a good anatomical as well as a functional outcome. As you can see over here, we can induce the PVD with a very good controlled suction, with a good kind of settings in your modern vitrectomy machine without causing any traction and any iatrogenic breaks near the equator. And you can see the PVD being induced over here. And immediately going on with the toggle of your foot, we can switch from the suction to the cutting mode in this modern vitrectomy machines. So induction of PVD till the edge of the lasered retina, and then finishing the case with the gas. So this is a particular case of a flat tabletop proliferation. Again, I want to insist that the good old doing a laser LIO before laser PRP before entering inside will help in achieving better hemostasis. As you can see, this has a plastered posterior hyaloid face where you can now use modern dyeing agents like IBTA. You can use even brilliant blue, retic blue to stain these membranes. I usually prefer IBTA because whatever remnants remain behind can also help in reducing the residual macular edema. You can now use modern micro gauge forceps to induce the PVD over the optic disc area. And sometimes it's difficult, even with the best of the instrumentation. Then you go back to your old principles where you're using a 24 gauge needle to induce a cut in the posterior hyaloid right over the macula. And once you have this plane, then you can use the cutter to dissect that particular plane. Following the usual principles of desegmentation and delamination, all that is possible with the help of the port optimization. Whereas previously we had to come out, take in the vertical and the horizontal scissors. So that increased our surgical time as well as reduced. So with the cutter itself, if you are ambidextrous, then you can actually use the cutter in your left hand also, and to approach a difficult area, as in this case, over the optic nerve head, and dissect the posterior hyaloid plane over it. The bleed, whenever it occurs while teasing the FVP, there is a foot switch which has a IOP control. Suddenly you can face a bleeder without coming out, continuing with your lift and cut maneuver. You can just press the foot switch, the IOP will go up for a minute and the hemostasis will be achieved. Then you can tackle that bleeder later on. Like how you see in this particular case, once the dissection is over, a fill-in endo laser is very important, and you can also close the case. This is how the result is seen in the post-operative period. So achieving hemostasis is the cornerstone of PDR surgery, and that can be achieved with modern diathermy probes, which are very good, endocautery probes, which are very good. And there are certain maneuvers. So we need to know the principle as well as the modern technology, judicious use of anti-VEGF agents, pre as well as post the surgery will also help in bettering our outcomes. Thank you very much.
Okay. Swapnesh,
Yeah.
You said by increasing the IOP up to a minute.
Yeah.
But won't that be affecting the optic nerve head?
Yes, so there have been studies which have been showing, and that is a particular kind of a button which is given in the foot switch, especially for these surgeries. If we have to keep on watching the pallor or the pulsations at the optic nerve head. If it is going blanching, then we can just remove our light pipe, reduce the pressure temporarily, and then again go in. So you have to fine tune all these maneuvers. Obviously, you are not out of view of the optic nerve head, but a large bleeder can do away your good work which you have done till now of a good dissection. And even if you forget, suppose you put on a switch and pressure goes up to 35 or 40, it will help the hemostasis. And even if you are forgetting, the machine will beep you every minute that you are on a high IOP mode. And it will remind you to come back to normal 22 or 20 is the usual IOP which I operate upon.
Okay, fair enough. Do you do a bleeding or clotting time profile for these patients before you take up?
I do it if the patient is on nephropathy and he's on kidney dialysis. Then in those cases, I really find it more challenging. Then I ask these patients to undergo twice non-heparinized dialysis before they are taken up in the OT. But we have to explain them that the possibility of a vit lavage in the following 2 weeks is there for these patients because they can have rebleeds.
Okay. fair. Thanks. Tushar sir, any questions from your end?
Yeah. Great presentation, Dr. Swapnesh. I feel that probably because of the new equipments and new instrumentation in vitreoretinal surgery, you feel like driving Tesla compared to Maruti. And I wanted to ask you two extreme questions, Swapnesh.
Yes.
One is how early you would take up a case of PDR for surgery, and what is the worst case you would take up the PDR surgery, considering you have excellent equipments in your hand, you know?
Yeah. So the earliest I would not hesitate to take up a case where there is macular traction. If the TRD is away from the macula, I would do serial OCTs to keep a close watch. But the moment anything within the major arcades is starting to lift, even if the vision is say 6/9, 6/12, I would not hesitate to go in, but I would utilize this waiting time in again going back to the old principles of doing a PRP for this patient, because that will stabilize the disease process. It will help me intraoperative as well as post-operative. So that answers your first question of how soon I will enter.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, combined retinal detachments is the other end of the spectrum. If the patient is having a PL vision, if the other eye is also showing a very bad scenario, the patient is having a neovascular glaucoma, I would look the slit lamp examination is important. If the iris margins are rolled up, then probably it shows that he has been having this condition for a very long time, and there is no point in then entering inside and doing any heroics. So if there is a combined retinal detachment with equally bad anterior migration of these VEGF molecules, showing all the Synechae as well as the rolling up of the pupillary margins, I would probably refer this patient to the higher centers for second opinion before taking a decision myself.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Swapnesh, it's a very nice presentation. I enjoyed the visual presentation also. I have a very basic question to you. Like as sir said, like riding a Tesla and it's a Maruti car. Do you feel that these equipments, the equipments have just reduced the time of surgery, or do you feel that the prognosis and the recovery period has also improved because of the use of these modern equipments?
In a very standard case, no financial interest. Even if I use a modern machine like Constellation or a Bausch & Lomb machine versus a Appa machine or a Reticare machine, it really doesn't matter if you have done 200, 300 cases under your belt. But in a case where there is a crunch situation where it is a high myopic patient in a retinal detachment, or if there is a large fibrovascular proliferation at the posterior pole staring at you in spite of giving Avastin, definitely the modern vitrectomy machines with these minor maneuvers help. So it depends on what severity of the case. If you are having a very tough case, then these modern instrumentation definitely helps. See, like 27 gauge, it's reduced the chance of bleed from the sclerotomies inside the vitreous cavity.
Right. So the convenience factor has also.
Yes. Sterility and convenience.
All right. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, somebody has a second device which is on. That's why that echo is coming. Omkar sir,
Hello.
yeah, somebody has a second device on. That's why that echo is coming. I think probably Dr. Ajit Joshi sir, there is a second device.
हाँ सर, yes sir. Now sir, now there is no second device.
Very clear. Dr. Ajit, can you go ahead with your presentation?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Topic of my discussion is evaluation of macular thickness in mild to moderate myopic patients using OCT. Uncorrected myopia, it is a major cause of diminished vision nowadays. Prevalence of myopia is increasing day by day. WHO report of 2010 says that 27% of world population was myopic in 2010. Probably it will be 50% in 2050. And in 2010, 2.8% had high myopia. Now this prevalence is maximum in Asian population. One of the causes of myopia is, one of the types is axial myopia, where there is excessive axial elongation. And it is found that each 1 millimeter elongation causes 2.3 diopter of myopia. Now myopia can cause irreversible visual impairment if there is associated complications like macular degeneration, myopic macular degeneration, cataract, detachment or open angle glaucoma. There are many studies which have done in children and in older population regarding myopic changes, but very few studies are available about effect of mild to moderate myopia on macular thickness, especially in young adults. So we thought of taking this particular disease. Now OCT is the proper tool which will give in vivo measurement of the retinal thickness. Rest all investigations are for quality, but OCT will give quantitative measurement of thickness. So purpose of my study is to study association of axial length measured by immersion scan with macular thickness using OCT in mild to moderate young adult myopics. This is a hospital-based observational cross-sectional study. It was conducted on 159 eyes of 85 patients having axial myopia. Inclusion criteria, age group was 18 to 32, and BCVA of the patient was 6'6", and who were willing to give consent and participate in the study. Exclusion criteria was patients having concurrent disease other than myopia, like glaucoma, or patients who have undergone refractive surgery. Institutional ethical committee clearance was taken. Informed written consent was taken. Initially, patients were subjected to autokeratorefractometry on Topcon 800. Best corrected visual acuity was done. All patients subjective refraction was done. Refractive error was expressed in spherical equivalent. That is, spherical error plus half the cylinder. Slit lamp is used for anti-segment evaluation. Axial length was measured with immersion scan, killer acutome. IOP was measured, fundus exam was done on dilated pupil. Then the patients were subjected to OCT, where macular thickness was measured. Now this particular diagram of ETDRS macular grid that was used, centrally there is foveal thickness, central foveal thickness. Inner circle has 4 quadrants, outer circle has 4 quadrants, superior, inferior, nasal, temporal each. So this particular grid measures 9 segments of the macula. Here another diagram shows immersion scan. Statistical analysis was done with the help of biostatistician wherever required. These are demographic details. Population of 18 to 22 comprised of 72 eyes, 45%. Males were more in number than females. Refractive error 89, 56% had mild refractive error, 0.25 to 2, whereas 4.25 to 6 was in 22. This was uncorrected visual acuity depending upon the refractive error. Axial length distribution among the genders was there. Males had obviously more axial length as compared to females. Distribution of axial length according to age was done. 18 to 22 had more axial length as compared to 27 to 30 years. That also like quite expected. Axial length according to degree of myopia was also studied. As the axial length increased, myopia increased. For a group of 4.25 to 6, it was 25.13 plus minus 0.48. P-value was significant here. This is very important chart. As the spherical equivalent goes on increasing, we found that central foveal thickness went on increasing. That was significant. It is shown in with green diagram. I will repeat this. As myopia increased, central foveal thickness was found to increase. P-value was significant. Whereas average outer macular thickness was found to be decreasing with the increase in spherical equivalent, though it was not statistically significant. But one must note that average outer macular thickness went on decreasing as spherical equivalent increased. Then we correlated macular thickness with axial length, and we found that as axial length increased, central fovealness increased. That is again shown in green field diagram, and it was statistically significant. Whereas in outer, total outer, again there was a decrease in total outer as axial length went on increasing. That was not statistically significant. These are my results in nutshell. Now coming to axial length and refraction, as axial length increased, refraction increased, that was significant, if p-value was significant. Now coming to two main macular findings which we like to highlight. As the amount of myopia increased, central foveal thickness increased. So, and that was a significant increase in central foveal thickness. Saran AR et al. In his study has found same findings. Now, if you try to find out the pathophysiology of increased central foveal thickness, it is probably there must be occurring some pathologic subfoveal chorioretinal changes, or there is subclinical vitreoretinal traction which is not yet detected by OCT. That can explain the increased foveal thickness with increased myopic refraction. Another finding we noted was average outer macular thickness decreased as the degree of myopia increased. Study done by Lam et al. He also found that macular thickness decreased with increase in myopic correction. Now, myopic axial elongation of the globe is associated with thinning of the retina in equatorial and pre-equatorial region, while there is central foveal thickening. So this equatorial and pre-equatorial elongation with axial elongation is the result that peripheral macular thinning is noted with increased myopic correction. Probably this axial elongation is taking place predominantly in the equatorial and pre-equatorial region, because the sclera and retina in equator and pre-equatorial area is probably least resistant to the tractional forces which are happening along with the axial elongation. Conclusion: myopia is highly prevalent ocular disorder. Prevalence is increasing. Availability of modern imaging technology like OCT helps in vivo measurement of thickness, and where the relationship between myopia and thickness can be very well assessed. This is associated with progression of degree of myopia and increase in axial length. Central fovealness increases and peripheral outer macular region thickness decreases. These findings of our study may help in improving the interpretations of results of OCT testing during diagnosis and management of ocular diseases associated with young myopic population. So coming to our topic, what is myopic maculopathy? So myopic maculopathy is a very dreadful condition, and probably its prevalence will go on increasing as we find more, will go on finding more and more myopics. This is generally commonly seen in high myopes, but it is also reported to be there in low myopes. So evaluation of every myope is extremely important because of this impending threat of maculopathy. Now, risk factors are maculopathy are higher refractive error and longer axial lengths. Classification, as you know, classification 0, no degeneration, 2 class, category 4, macular atrophy, plus you have plus signs of lacquer cracks, subfoveal hemorrhage, which are having very worst prognosis. This particular classification is based on the
30-second left, please.
Prevention treatment only will be able to reduce the onset and progression, like orthocam, multifocal contact lenses. Complications can be treated myopic CNV with intravitreal anti-VEGF, while macular hole will need vitrectomy. This is the reference which states that with increasing young population, more number of maculopathy will emerge in future. These are my references. Thank you for your kindness.
Okay, Dr. Ajit,
Yes,
did you find any correlationship between the visual acuity and the macular thickness in myopes?
Sir, it is not affecting visual acuity. What we find was vision loss was correlated with the spherical equivalent. but not with the, indirectly it was related to macular thickness. Because as spherical equivalent increased, we found that central foveal thickness was increasing.
Yeah.
So
but then
indirectly we can say that it affects vision also.
Okay, fair.
But it is corrected vision. All were improving to 6/6.
Irrespective of the macular thickness.
Yes, sir. Yes. Every patient,
Okay.
that was the inclusion criteria also.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Anybody else
yeah.
wanting to ask any questions?
Dr. Ajit,
Yes, sir.
just a short question.
Yes, sir.
Why did you prefer immersion biometry in such cases?
Sir, you can say that is our limitation, as we didn't have optical biometry that time. So we prefer to take immersion instead of contact scan. But you can say this is limitation of our study. Preferably, if one uses optical biometry, that will be better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Can we go on to the next speaker?
Excuse me, can I know who will be next speaker? I think the first one didn't present. So should I go ahead?
Sir, you can go ahead. Dr. Mohammad Salim. Arun.
Yeah.
Okay. Can the
Proceed
last
to
speaker
evaluation.
please unshare so that I can start sharing my screen? Can I start sharing?
Yes, you can.
Okay. I think, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
I started sharing.
Yeah, now you're visible.
I started sharing my screen.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So
We
can I
see
start,
that.
please?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. So before I start, I would like to thank the MOS for giving me this opportunity to present. And I'm also equally grateful and thankful for my guide and my HOD, Dr. Maha, who has always been my support and she has always encouraged to go ahead. And before I start, I would just to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Gigani. Actually, I'm from Akola in Maharashtra, but at present I'm practicing in Doha in Qatar. So the aim of the topic is, we have to correlate the OCTs of the patients who present with non-ischemic CRVO with macular edema, and what is the prognosis when we give them an injection of Lucentis. So the limitation of the study that we did only trial with only with one medicine and not the other plans which are available. So before I start, unfortunately, I don't have any financial interest in any of this publication. So as we all know that the venous occlusion, that is the second most common retinal vascular disease what we see in the retina practice. Second only to the diabetic retinopathy and the diabetic macular edema. The incidence is roughly around 2%, and the major cause of visual loss in these patients is the macular edema. And there are various modalities of investigations over there where we can know the macular edema, but the most commonly that is being used to document as well as to record is the OCT. So in this study, we used the ranibizumab Lucentis, which is an anti-VEGF, the dose of 0.5 milligram in a 0.05 cc, and which it actually causes to the macular, which is for the treatment of the macular edema. And after successful treatment, most of these patients, they do get a resolution of the macular edema to some amount of visual recovery. But sometimes we do face some hardships over there, that even if the OCT or the clinical features, they show that there is a resolution, but the patients don't have a substantial amount of visual recovery. So coming to the aim of the study, that we wanted to analyze the OCT scans of the non-ischemic CRVO with macular edema who are treated with the Lucentis, and to find out whether there is any changes in the OCT which can give us a prognostic factor. So the demography of the study was, it was a prospective study where we studied 61 eyes of total 60 patients presented with macular edema secondary to non-ischemic CRVO over a period of 2 years. And all the patients were more than 18 years of age, and the vision was more than 660 to rule out the presence of any ischemic CRVO. There was any clear media, no other factor which is contributing to the vision loss, and there's no evidence of ischemia. If it's suspected, FFA was done. It was not a mandatory to do all of them, and there was no evidence of any other retinopathy if the patient had any other systemic disease as well. The exclusion criteria has included vision which were less than 660, and they have any hemorrhages which is present on the macula, which can be a causative factor apart from the macular edema to the decrease in the visual acuity. And any other previous treatment has been done to this patient either in the form of laser or any other injection or surgery has been done to them. So before we started, we had informed the patients, a written consent was taken, pre and post injection of the OCT scans were analyzed, and the post injection was done exactly at 1 month, and the vision was evaluated at each and every step, and if required, even the refraction was done to know the final visual status. The average patients in this were around 55 years age, and most of these patients they have came with acute vision complaints within an average of 2 weeks. Any other systemic disease contributing to the visual loss were excluded. Only hypertension, but hypertension and diabetes were included unless and until they had any retinopathic features or any maculopathy features. 24 patients had hypertension, and another 11 had combined hypertension and diabetes. Other were diabetes and other systemic disease, which is causing no other significant cause of decreased vision. The OCT analysis was done on the basis of the type of edema that we had seen. We categorized them into 4 types of edema, where the patient had primarily a cystoid macular edema on the presentation. That was one group. The other subgroup was where they had primary subretinal fluid. The other type of edema where they had a mixed combine of equivalent of subretinal fluid with the cystoid macular edema. The other was the miscellaneous type, which are not categorized into the other 3 groups. We also saw into the outer retinal layer, which correspond to the RPE photoreceptor layer. So this is we categorize as the third high reflective band, which we see on the OCT. The third category that we have seen was the central macular thickness. Coming to the results of each and every parameter that we have seen, the cystoid macular edema, there were a total of only 18 patients. They improved significantly after the first injection, where the preoperative visual acuity in the Snellen's chart was average was 0.26. They improved around 0.5 with a p-value of 0.06, which was a significantly which was statistically very significant. The subretinal fluid were total of 14 patients, where the pre-op vision was 0.106 and post injection it was 0.2, which was not that significant. The other mix and the miscellaneous types also were there, but we didn't take them into consideration because we couldn't analyze the anatomical changes or the variants which was occurring in the pre and post treatment of the disease. Now coming, like I'll show you some cases over there. This is one case of primarily CME, which presented with a visual acuity of 624, had primarily a CME. OCT was done, which showed the cystoid macular edema pattern, which we put them into group 1. The post Lucentis injection, the patient improved to 6.6 with complete resolution of the edema. Then we had another group of patients who came with the primary subretinal fluid with a vision of 660. Injection was given, there was complete resolution, but the visual acuity did not improve. So there is some kind of changes in the OCT, which suggests that we can categorize them and tell them how much the visual acuity would be. So now if we compare the case 1 and the case 2, if you see the fundus features, both of them look similar, but the OCT shows a different type of edema with the same kind of a response with complete resolution, but a different kind of visual response. So there are some anatomical changes which is taking place. I will come back to the discussion in the later part. Then coming to the second part, where the patient had a good reflectivity, which is shown on the outer layer, which shows the RPE photoreceptor layer, where there was a good reflectivity. The pre-op vision was around 0.2, improved to 0.4 with a good p-value, which shows that statistically it is very significant. But in this, the other group of patients where the reflective band was very poor, so there was not much statistically significant improvement. So similarly, I'll show you a patient over there. This is a patient who came with a 660 vision with cystoid macular edema as well as the subretinal fluid, which is showing that the photoreceptor layer is quite intact. We gave an injection. After 1 month, the patient improved. Though there is still some amount of edema, the patient continued with the treatment and improved further. But the important that I want to show you that the photoreceptor layer was intact. So this is one of the contributing factors where the patient gets a visual acuity improvement. Now we have another patient here which looks similar on the color photo, but you can see over there that here there is a disruption of the RPE photoreceptor layer. So the patient was treated, but the visual acuity, and there was a resolution of the edema, but the vision did not improve much. Now, if you compare both of them, the fundus picture shows that almost it is
1
similar.
minute left, sir.
Okay, so there is some role of the role of a turbidity of fluid or the quality of the fluid, and which is suspecting that there could be some action of the fluid which is causing to the impairment of visual recovery. The macular thickness did not have any bearing. To cut short, I'll come to the discussion that venous occlusion mostly, like it causes circulatory impedance, causes hypoxia. We try to give anti-VEGFs, try to block the release of vasogenic factors so that there could be some improvement and a reversal. And in subretinal fluid, there is, because of leakage into the subretinal spaces, and which causes the photoreceptor damage as well as a derangement. So when there is either it can lead to ischemia or it can lead to turbidity of fluid, and that is where you see the incomplete OCT picture of the RPE photoreceptor layer. So conclusion would say that the CME has got a better visual prognosis compared to the SRF. And if you see a good reflectivity, which suggests that could be a possibility of good visual recovery after the resolution of the edema, no relation of the macular thickness. So basically, coming to the conclusion, it is that it can be helpful in clinical practice to counsel the patient. The limitation was the analysis was done only on the first month of treatment, though the patients continued with the treatment if required, and we analyzed only one type of injection. Actually, we wanted to see what is the response on the anatomical factor. And thank you everyone, especially to Dr. Mahan, the vitreoretinal team, which we are working with at Doha. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for sir?
Yes, Dr. Gigani, it was a wonderful presentation. A lot of a good demonstration of clinical cases of CRVO. What was the main thinking in your mind to avoid non-ischemic CRVO cases in this study?
No, because actually we wanted to roll out the ischemic mechanism over there, where the ischemia can be cause of the decreased vision. So we wanted to find out basically, the edema which is there, which is the cause of the vision, and if we can control this edema, there is no other ischemic cause over there which can cause the decreased vision. So what is the edema which is causing the anatomical changes which can be demonstrated with the OCT, which can help us and guide and counsel the patient and tell them, that most probably that this group of patient may have some visual improvement, and that there is a limitation of the treatment on the subretinal fluid or where the photoreceptor is damaged, so that most probably this patient may not have much of improvement, though we are going to treat him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gigani. Can we go on to Dr. Yash Parmar?
Yes, Dr. Yash, please share the screen. Dr. Yash, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Please share the screen, no? Next, I would request
Dr. Bhutada.
Dr. Bhushan to be ready, please, with your slides. Make it full screen, we can see your presentation. Dr. Yash, please make it full screen and start presenting.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Yash Parmar. I'm a vitreoretina fellow at Narayan Nethralaya and my hometown is Mumbai. I'll be presenting a paper on characteristics of retinal pigment clumps in type 2 macular telangiectasia. So type 2 macular telangiectasia is a retinal neurodegenerative vascular disorder affecting the elderly. It affects the deep capillary plexus and it is associated with inner and outer retinal structural defects, photoreceptor layer atrophy, and in late stages, it can cause neovascular complexes. It is so the retinal pigment clumps is also seen in the later stages of the disease, which is very characteristic of this disease. Gass and Blody identified this disease and they divided into 5 stages. Januzzi later on simplified it into proliferative and non-proliferative disease. So retinal pigment clumps are characteristics of stage 4 of gas and bloody classification. Retinal pigment clumps can be seen clinically, and it can also be seen with multiple imaging modalities like FFA, or that is fundus fluorescein angiography, autofluorescence, OCT, and multicolor imaging. In this study, we aim to develop a relationship between the size of the pigment clumps seen on multicolor imaging and the level at which the clumps are seen on the OCT, and to correlate it with the visual acuity and the neovascularization in the type 2 macular telangiectasia patients. This was a retrospective study over a period of 3 years. All the patients who had type 2 macular telangiectasia with retinal pigment clumps were included. They were divided into proliferative and non-proliferative diseases according to Januzzi's classifications. And the patients who developed a subretinal neovascular membrane were included into the proliferative disease. The other data which was collected was age, gender, laterality, and the presence of diabetes mellitus. So this is images of one of our patients. The first image shows us that there are a few this retinal pigment clumps clinically. Autofluorescence shows a hypoautofluorescence. Fluorescein angiography shows hypofluorescence. The multicolor which was used in this study, this is the multicolor imaging. Here we could actually measure the area by using a tool which is available in the Heidelberg Spectralis machine and the OCT. So this OCT shows the retinal pigment clumps with backshadowing. This is an OCT image of another patient. Here, this was an important part of the study where we tried to analyze which layer was involved in the with the retinal pigment clumps. So the first image shows that the retinal pigment clumps were located outside the outer plexiform layer, and in the second image we can see that the retinal pigment clumps have migrated inwards to the inner layers and above the OPL. So this was one part of the study which we had developed, which we had said that with the migration of cell inwards, there is higher risk of developing a proliferative disease. Here we can also see that there is a presence of neovascular membrane along with the inward migration of the retinal pigment clumps. So all the data was analyzed using the GraphPad software. These are the tables. A total of 52 eyes were included. Majority of the patients were female. The mean age was 64 years, and 74% of the patients were diabetic. We divided them into proliferative and non-proliferative group, that is patients who developed neovascular membrane and who did not develop neovascular membrane. So 20% of 20 patients developed neovascular, 20 eyes developed neovascular membrane, and female presenting poor visual acuity and larger area of pigment was associated with the proliferative disease. Clinically, various findings were evaluated and documented, of which the proliferative disease and the subretinal neovascular membrane was of importance, and the mean pigment area was around 1.34 millimeters. So a list of OCT findings were evaluated. Around 13 of them findings, all of these were evaluated, out of which of importance was the location of the pigment plaque. So we could see that in the neovascular disease, the pigment plaque was present about in 22 patients out of 25, it was present above the outer plexiform layer. The neovascular disease was either epiretinal neovascularization, subretinal neovascularization, or retinochoroidal anastomosis. This is a ROC curve analysis of multicolor image, which shows that female gender, a larger area of the pigment clump, and the poor presenting visual acuity had higher risk of developing proliferative disease. Similarly, on OCT evaluation, female sex, hyperreflective middle retinal layers, poor presenting visual acuity, larger area of pigment clump, and the inward location of pigment plug, that is above the OPL, had higher chances of developing retinal neovascularization. So type 2
time is up.
yes sir, I am concluding now. Type 2 McTEL is a neurodegenerative disease. Few studies have already shown a relationship between the pigment plaque and the visual outcomes. The other study by Lewing et al. Showed, this is a recent study which showed that there's a strong association with the size of the pigment plaque and the development of subretinal neovascular membrane. In our study, what we did is that we included the size of the pigment plaque and also studied the location of the retinal pigment clumps and its relation to whether it is migrating inwards from the outer plexiform layer. And we found that the vertical migration of the retinal pigment epithelium cell over the outer plexiform layer and had a higher chance of developing proliferative disease and poor visual outcome. Females were at a higher risk. So we believe that
you need to stop your presentation, sir. You need to stop your presentation. You already taken up the time for the question answer also.
Okay. Should be included in the current classification system. Thank you. These are my references.
Yeah. Can we move on to the next talk, please?
Yeah, Dr. Bhushan, are you ready with your presentation?
Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, Parma, please stop sharing your screen.
Dr. Bhushan, we are getting an echo to your voice. Just see to it that no other device is on.
No other device is on. Parma is still sharing the screen.
Okay, fine. Technical team, yeah.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Today's my topic, paper presentation is multi-layered pigment epithelial detachment, and is this a new variant of age-related macular degeneration? As we know, the relation between AMD and PED, 80% of the neovascular AMD is occult type of choroidal neovascular membrane. Pigment epithelial detachment is a quintessential part of neovascular AMD. Rahimi et al. He defined multilayering as the fusiform spindle-shaped complex of highly organized layered of the homogeneous reflective bands on the PED. So as we can see, this is the CN-VM multilayered lamelles. Multilayered pigment epithelial detachment is a unique form of disease in patients of type 1 neovascular AMD, eyes that have received chronic anti-VEGF therapy. Large fibrovascular PED is present and good vision is present. But a few questions that remain unanswered were, why do not all the fibrovascular type of PED lead to multilayering? Does baseline OCT features give a clue? Does this phenomenon occur in PCV eyes? Does chronic anti-VEGF regime play a significant role? Our aim of this study was to study the baseline clinical and tomographic characteristic of eyes with MLPED. Which include precursor OCT features, factors associated with evaluation of multilayering, and correlation with treatment response. We retrospectively analyzed the 204 eyes of already patient known with choroidal neovascular membrane, and we studied the clinical profile, baseline OCT features, FFA, ICGA evaluation, timing and events related to multilayering and treatment effect. And we found that out of 204, 17 patients were having multilayering, of which 10 were males and 7 were females. And out of these, 10 were having pre-existing malignant hypertension. On fundus fluorescein angiography, the type of CNVM was occurred in 15 cases. And on ICG, the type was, the most common was PCV, that is polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. Nature of PED showed that multilayering was present in up to 7 patients. We also studied the timing of multilayering. Multilayering at baseline itself or multilayering occurred during the course of treatment, and we found that multilayering occurred after mean of 12 injections. De novo occurrence of multilayering in 41% of the cases, and this is not reported in the literature. We found that the RP characteristics of multilayering was most commonly found. We were cremated, that is the serrations in the RP. We also found that large PEDs, they experience detergence, subretinal hyperreflective material. If we see this subretinal hyperreflective material, this heralds and this itself signifies that multilayering has begun. Also, choroidal clefts, 10 out of 17 patients, 10 patients were not having clefts, but 7 patients, which is significant number, were having choroidal clefts. So, subretinal hyperreflective material and choroidal clefts was used as a significant factor for determining if the patient were going into multilayering. All the clefts showed waxing and waning nature, suggestive of exudative fluid precedes increasing lamellar deposition, sign of increased activity. Previous studies, they found that the multilayering spindles, they were either hyporeflective or hyperreflective. But contradictorily, our study showed that 8 eyes were showing 14 eyes were showing isoreflective spindles. Multilayering spindles with clefts within fibrovascular PEDs were first identified by Spade. Rahimi and with his associate further defined multilayering lamellae in the PED, hypothesized that this may be avascular, but there is no proof as present. OCT may be superior to routine ICGA evaluation of this because of its ability to study slabs of the tissue. All the patients were subjected to either anti-VEGF therapy or photodynamic therapy, and we found that patients showed better response to anti-VEGF, particularly aflibercept. And there were no further complications of RIPS. Stability of vision, mean BCVA at baseline was 6.12 and final BCVA was 6/36. Multilayering reflective lamella help in stabilizing the PED, which causes neovascular and subsequent cicatrizing processes confined to the sub-RP space. Neovascular tissue may act as a surrogate for the choriocapillaries and provide oxygenation or nutritional support to the outer retina and RP, thereby protecting against involution and atrophy of photoreceptors. Contrary to previous studies, we found that multilayering could occur de novo, that is without starting the anti-VEGF therapy as seen in 7 eyes, and the patient were asymptomatic and relatively having good vision. Other eyes developed MLPED, multilayering subsequent to chronic anti-VEGF therapy and received a mean of 12 intravitreal injections. So anti-VEGF therapy may not be an implicating event in multilayering eyes. Multilayering may just be manifestation of chronic sequestered disease process. Systemic association, we found that 10 out of 16 patients were having malignant hypertension, and it is well understood and known that malignant hypertension is a main association with polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. So what we understood from our series of study was polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy eyes can also manifest multilayering. The subretinal hyperreflective material, subretinal hyperreflective material and choroidal clefts, it signifies that the multilayering has begun. There were spindles were avascular in nature, and
1 minute left.
I am just concluding. And hypertension may propel fibrinous deposition. So multilayering may represent a different pathologic process and may be considered a new variant. Thank you.
Hello. Any questions?
Yeah, Dr.
Sumit, is
Bhushan?
there any speaker left? Hello.
I am done with the presentation.
Okay. Sumit? I think we can then conclude.